A waitress is fired by the manager for giving snacks to hungry twins. But when the owner arrives and sees the children, everything changes. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and golden brown toast filled the air at Golden Meal's diner. Sarah, her 42 years etched with fine lines that told stories of 1,000 smiles, adjusted the signature canary yellow apron of the chain. Her fingers, calloused from 2 decades of balancing trays, smoothed the fabric almost by instinct. Through the reflection on the gleaming front window, she observed the frantic movement in the kitchen, sizzling grills, whirring blenders, and the constant clinking of silverware and plates, a familiar symphony that, until a few months ago, used to make her smile. The bell on the front door jingled. Sarah turned, hopeful to see a friendly face. Her practiced smile faltered when she saw Robert, the new regional manager, walk in with his black leather briefcase and stern expression. "Good morning, team," he announced, his voice cutting through the hum of the dining area. "Meeting in 5 minutes. Everyone present." Sarah's shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly. She exchanged a look with Carlos, the head cook who had been there since the diner opened. His tired eyes mirrored her apprehension. In the back room, smelling of cleaning product and stale coffee, the team crowded in. Standing at the front, Robert unfolded a colorful chart. "Our numbers are below target," he declared, his finger accusatorily hovering over a downward-sloping red line. "Starting today, new policies go into effect." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach as Robert listed the changes: cuts in overtime, reduced portion sizes, and the elimination of special treatment for regular customers. And most importantly, he emphasized, his gaze sweeping the room, zero tolerance for unauthorized charity. This includes free meals, leftovers, or any form of handout. Understood. The room responded with a reluctant murmur of agreement. Sarah bit her lip, remembering Mr. Johnson, the widower who came in every Tuesday and always received an extra slice of pie. Back in the dining area, Sarah moved on autopilot, serving, smiling, clearing plates, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, watching the street outside. The afternoon wore on, and with it, heavy clouds gathered in the sky. The first rumble of thunder echoed as Sarah was cleaning a table near the window. That's when she saw them. 2 identical girls, no older than 5 or 6, stopped in front of the window. Their tangled, damp brown hair framed pale, thin faces. Wide, dark eyes were fixed on the colorful plates inside, following every lifted fork, every chewing mouth. Sarah froze, the cleaning cloth forgotten in her hand. One of the girls pressed her palm to the glass, leaving a small mark. The other hugged her own stomach, a gesture as subtle as it was painful to witness. The bell on the door chimed again. Robert emerged from his office, his eyes immediately zeroing in on the scene, his brow furrowed, and he started to walk toward the door. Sarah's heart pounded. Her legs moved before her brain could register what she was doing. Within seconds, she was standing between Robert and the door. "I'll handle this," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Robert hesitated, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Remember the new policies, Sarah." She nodded mechanically, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back as she walked toward the door. Outside, the rain was starting to come down in heavy drops. Sarah opened the door, the bell jingling softly. The girls took a step back, eyes wide with fear and hope. For a moment, Sarah was paralyzed. To her right, customers ate, oblivious to the small drama unfolding. To her left, Robert watched, arms crossed in disapproval. And in front of her, 2 children shivered in the rain that now fell mercilessly. Thunder roared again, closer this time. Sarah felt something roar within her in response. 20 years of practiced smiles, of "yes, sir," and "as you wish, ma'am," dissolved in that instant. Her gaze locked with the girls. In those hungry eyes, she saw reflections of herself decades ago, of Carlos, of so many others who had found not just a job, but a home at Golden Meals. Sarah took a deep breath. Her hand slipped into her apron pocket, feeling the reassuring weight of her rent savings. In a swift motion, She turned, blocking Robert's view. "Come in," she whispered to the girls, her smile now genuine and warm. "Let me tell you a secret about the best apple pie in town." As she guided the children inside, Sarah knew she was crossing a line, but feeling their cold little hands in hers, she realized some rules were meant to be broken, and some stories were meant to be rewritten. The aroma of cinnamon and caramelized apples surrounded Sarah as she led the twins to a discreet corner of the diner. Her eyes scanned the dining area, making sure Robert stayed in his office. "Here," she whispered, pointing to a semi-hidden booth. "Sit down." The girls obeyed silently, their movements synchronized as if they were one. Up close, Sarah could see details the window had hidden. Their dresses, once colorful, were now faded and patched. Their shoes, worn through the soles, had makeshift string for laces. "I'm Sarah," she said, kneeling to meet the children's eyes. "And you are?" The twin on the left, who had a small birthmark near her lip, answered, "I'm Sophie." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Louise," murmured the other, her fingers intertwined with her sister's under the table. Sarah noticed their thin wrists and sunken cheeks. Their eyes, though bright, were overshadowed by dark circles far too heavy for children so young. "Well, Sophie and Louise," Sarah smiled, feeling her heart clench. "How about a special meal on the house?" Before they could reply, she hurried off to the kitchen. Carlos raised an eyebrow when he saw her slip in stealthily. "I need 2 full plates," Sarah whispered. "And make it look like it's for table 5. Carlos hesitated for a moment, his eyes narrowing in understanding. Without a word, he nodded and turned to the stove. Minutes later, Sarah balanced a tray with 2 steaming plates of eggs, bacon, pancakes, and a generous slice of apple pie. She set them before the twins, whose eyes widened with a mix of amazement and gratitude. "Eat," she encouraged gently. "We have time." The girls needed no further prompting. They ate with a ravenousness that broke Sarah's heart, yet also with surprising manners. There were no crumbs, no noise. It was as if they feared the food would vanish if they drew too much attention. Sarah kept busy cleaning nearby tables, always keeping an eye on Robert's office door. With each passing minute, her heart pounded faster. She was breaking all the rules, but she felt no regret. It was then that Sophie, mouth still full of pie, asked, "Why are you being so nice to us?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She stepped closer, leaning in as if to collect plates. "Because everyone deserves a little kindness," she replied softly. Louise, swallowing a bite of pancake, added, "Mommy used to say that." "She did," Sarah couldn't help asking. "Before she went to heaven," Sophie explained, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah's heart sank. Orphans, that explained a lot. She was about to ask more questions when a movement in her peripheral vision alerted her. Robert. He stood in his office doorway, phone in hand, clearly recording the scene. Sarah felt the blood freeze in her veins. Instinctively, she positioned herself between Robert and the girls, as though her body alone could protect them. "Sarah." Robert's voice cut through the air like a knife. "My office." Now, the entire dining room seemed to freeze. Customers paused their meals, servers halted in mid-step. The only sound was the distant clank of utensils in the kitchen. With one final reassuring look at the twins, Sarah followed Robert. The door had barely closed before he exploded. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Sarah straightened her shoulders. "Helping hungry children." "Helping?" Robert let out a humorless laugh. "You're stealing." "Stealing from the company, stealing from me." "They're just kids, Robert. Orphans. How can we—" "I don't care if they're orphans or princesses," Robert interrupted, his face red with fury. "We have policies, rules, and you deliberately broke them." Sarah felt a surge of indignation rise in her chest. Some rules need to be broken when— "No," Robert cut her off again, his voice dangerously low. "You don't decide which rules to follow. I decide. And I've decided you're fired." The world seemed to spin under Sarah's feet. "Fired? After 20 years? Robert gave a cold smile that never reached his eyes. "Exactly, and I have it all on video as proof." Before Sarah could fully process what was happening, Robert opened the office door and shoved her out. "Attention, everyone!" His voice boomed through the dining area. This employee was caught stealing food and giving it away to strangers. She no longer represents Golden Meals. Sarah, hand over your badge and leave immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah, dazed, looked around. She saw shock on her co-workers' faces, confusion in the customers' eyes, and then her gaze found Sophie and Louise. The twins were standing, trembling, eyes wide with fear. Before Sarah could say anything, they bolted for the door, disappearing into the rainy street. "No!" Sarah shouted, moving to follow them, but Robert grabbed her arm. "Your badge," he demanded. With shaking hands, Sarah removed the badge she'd worn for 2 decades. Handing it over, she felt as though she were surrendering a piece of herself. That was when the commotion began. "This is outrageous," shouted an elderly customer, standing up. "She was helping children," exclaimed another. Soon, the entire dining area was in an uproar. Customers yelling, employees murmuring, some even throwing their own badges on the floor in solidarity. But Sarah barely registered the chaos around her. Her eyes were fixed on the door through which Sophie and Louise had disappeared. They were out there, alone in the rain, and it was her fault. As she walked toward the exit, ignoring Robert's shouts and the customers' pleas, Sarah felt the weight of her actions. She had lost her job, her security. But what hurt the most was knowing that by trying to help, she might have brought more harm to 2 little souls who needed protection. The rain greeted her outside, mingling with the tears now streaming freely down her face. Sarah glanced up and down the street, desperately searching for a glimpse of the twins, but they were gone, swallowed by the unrelenting city. With a heavy heart and an uncertain future, Sarah took one last look at Golden Meals. 20 years of her life ended in an instant, all because of one act of kindness. As she walked away, a question echoed in her mind. Was it worth it? The answer, she knew, lay in the grateful eyes of 2 hungry girls, and that no one could take from her. The black Bentley glided silently down the wet street, coming to a stop in front of Golden Meals. Antoine Laurent, 70 years old, observed the familiar facade through the fogged-up window. The once bright golden sign now looked dull under the grey sky. With a sigh, Antoine adjusted his silk tie and stepped out of the car. His bespoke Italian shoes touched the sidewalk with a soft splash. The driver rushed to hold an umbrella over him, but Antoine waved him off. "No need, Jacques. I won't melt." As he walked toward the entrance, Antoine felt every bit of his 70 years. His hair, once a vibrant brown, was now a distinguished silver. Deep lines marked his face, silent witnesses to decades of tough decisions and sleepless nights. He paused for a moment, peering inside through the front window. Memories flooded his mind. It was 1975 when he, a young French immigrant full of dreams, opened the doors of this diner for the first time. The scent of freshly brewed coffee, the clink of cups, the friendly chatter of customers, it was more than a business. It was a home away from home. Antoine shook his head, returning to the present. Something was off. The welcoming atmosphere he had worked so hard to cultivate seemed to have dissipated. Stepping inside, the familiar doorbell chimed, but no one looked up. The employees moved mechanically, their smiles appearing forced. Customers ate in silence, lacking the camaraderie Antoine remembered. That's when he heard it. A loud, angry voice coming from the back. "No longer represents Golden Meals. Sarah, hand over your badge and leave immediately." Antoine frowned, making his way discreetly toward the commotion. He saw a middle-aged woman, eyes brimming with tears, handing her badge to a suited man he did not recognize. The room erupted in protest, customers shouting, employees murmuring. Antoine stood there, stunned, as the woman, Sarah, he presumed, walked out looking utterly defeated. "What on earth is happening here?" Antoine muttered to himself. Before he could intervene, the door slammed open. 2 small identical girls ran out, nearly colliding with his legs. For a brief moment, Antoine's eyes met theirs. There was fear, but also a spark of something else. Determination. Hope? He wasn't sure, but something about that look intrigued him. The twins vanished into the rain, followed closely by Sarah. Antoine found himself torn between following the tumult outside or investigating the chaos inside. He chose the latter. Squaring his shoulders, Antoine walked purposefully toward the suited man who was now trying to calm the enraged customers. "Excuse me," Antoine said, his voice calm but laced with authority. The man turned, annoyance clear on his face. "Look, sir, we're dealing with an internal situation here. If you could please go back to your—" "I'm afraid I cannot do that," Antoine interrupted softly. "You see, I'm Antoine Laurent, the founder of this chain." The blood drained from the man's face. "Mr. Laurent, we weren't expecting—" "Clearly," Antoine replied coolly. "And you are—" "Robert Durand, regional manager." Antoine nodded slowly. "Well, Mr. Durand, it seems we have much to discuss. Your office, please." As he followed Robert, Antoine couldn't help noticing the hopeful looks the employees shot him. What exactly had happened to his beloved diner? In the cramped office, Antoine refused to sit, preferring to stand, imposing. "Explain yourself," he ordered simply. Robert swallowed hard. "Mr. Laurent, I was just following protocol. That employee, Sarah, was caught giving away free food to vagrants. It's against company policy." Antoine raised an eyebrow. "Vagrants? You mean those two little girls?" "Well, yes. They weren't customers and how much did that meal cost the company?" Antoine interjected. Robert blinked, confused. Well, not much, but the principle." "The principle," Antoine repeated, his voice tinged with disappointment. "Let me tell you a principle, Mr. Durand. When I opened this diner, I was a young immigrant with barely a penny to my name. Do you know who gave me my first decent meal in weeks? The owner of a small cafe. She didn't know me, didn't know if I could pay. She just saw someone who was hungry and acted with compassion." Robert remained silent, his face a mixture of shame and confusion. Antoine continued, "That simple act of kindness inspired me. I vowed that if I ever had a place of my own, I would never deny a meal to someone truly in need. That, Mr. Durand, is the principle on which Golden Meals was founded." Turning to the window, Antoine gazed at the rain outside. "What happened to Sarah?" She was fired, sir." Antoine closed his eyes, feeling a deep sadness. "How long has she worked here?" 20 years, sir." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Antoine turned, his piercing gaze fixed on Robert. "Do you have a family, Mr. Durand?" Robert, caught off guard by the question, stammered, Yes, a wife and 2 kids. And if they were out there, hungry, wouldn't you want someone to show them a little compassion?" Robert lowered his eyes, unable to meet Antoine's. "I'll be staying in town for a few days," Antoine announced. "I want a full investigation into this incident, and I want Sarah reinstated by the end of the week." "But sir, corporate policies—" "Policies," Antoine interrupted firmly, "can be changed. Compassion, Mr. Durand, is non-negotiable." With that, Antoine headed for the door. Before leaving, however, he paused. "Oh, and one more thing. Those 2 girls, I want to know everything about them. Their story, their situation, everything." Robert nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, right away." As Antoine left the office, the hum in the dining room quieted. Every eye turned toward him, curiosity and hope palpable in the air. He paused, looking around. This place, once his pride and joy, now felt like a shadow of what it should be. But not for long. "Jacques," he called, and his driver appeared at once by his side. "Clear my schedule for the next week. It seems we have work to do here." As he walked back to his car, Antoine couldn't stop thinking about those 2 little girls. There was something about them, something familiar he couldn't place, and those eyes. One thing was certain. Antoine Laurent wouldn't rest until he discovered the truth behind this incident. And in the process, perhaps he could rediscover the soul of his beloved Golden Meals. The rain had eased to a light drizzle when Antoine left Golden Meals. His still sharp eyes scanned the street. That's when he saw them. Two tiny figures huddled under the awning of a closed store a few yards away. Antoine hesitated. Decades of corporate life had taught him caution, to keep a distance. But something about these children pulled him, like an invisible magnet. "Jacques," he called softly, "wait in the car." Ignoring the driver's worried glance, Antoine walked slowly toward the girls. They noticed him at once, stiffening like frightened animals. "Hello," he said, keeping his voice gentle and stopping at a respectful distance. "It's a bit cold out here, isn't it?" The twins glanced at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, the one on the left, Sophie, he recalled, spoke. "Are you the owner of the diner?" Antoine smiled kindly. "I was, a long time ago. Now I'm just an old man who's curious. May I sit with you?" After another exchanged look, Louise nodded shyly. Antoine settled on the step of the store, groaning theatrically. "Ah, these knees aren't what they used to be. And you two, what are you doing out here by yourselves?" "We were hungry," Sophie replied, her voice almost a whisper. "The nice lady gave us food, but then—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. Louise continued. "The mean man yelled at her. It was our fault." Antoine felt his heart tighten. "No, sweetheart, it wasn't your fault. Sometimes adults do foolish things." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "Do you live nearby?" The girls exchanged another look, clearly debating how much they could reveal. "Not too far," Sophie finally replied, "but Daddy isn't home right now." "He's looking for work," Louise added. "Again." Antoine nodded in understanding. "And your mother?" The silence that followed was deafening. Louise lowered her head, while Sophie wrapped her arms around her sister protectively. "Mommy went to heaven," Sophie said quietly. 2 years ago." Antoine closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of these children's loss. When he opened them again, the girls were watching him intently. "I'm so sorry to hear that," he said sincerely. "It must be hard for you and your father." Louise nodded. "Daddy works a lot. Sometimes we don't see him for days. But Aunt Amélie takes care of us," Sophie quickly added, as if worried they were speaking ill of their father. Antoine perked up at this information. "Aunt Amélie, does she live with you?" "No," Louise answered. "She's a teacher. She visits when she can." Antoine processed this, his mind already spinning with possibilities. "Is she your father's sister or your mother's?" "Mommy's," Sophie said. "She looks a lot like her." Something about that phrase made Antoine pause. There was something familiar about the girls' faces, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He shook his head, setting the thought aside for now. "Well," he said, rising slowly, "it's getting late. You should go home." The twins looked at each other again, hesitating. We don't want to bother Aunt Amélie," Louise murmured. "She already does so much for us." Antoine felt a wave of protectiveness surge through him. These children, so young, already carrying the weight of the world on their small shoulders. "Listen," he said, crouching again to meet their eyes. "How about this? I have a car right over there. I can give you a ride home. And tomorrow, what if you come back to the diner? I promise no one will yell at you. In fact, I bet you'll find a nice surprise." The girls looked at him with a mix of hope and distrust. "How do we know we can trust you?" Sophie asked, her voice surprisingly firm. Antoine smiled, impressed by the child's boldness. Slowly, he took out his wallet and removed a gold business card. "This has my name and number. If anything goes wrong, ask an adult to call me, day or night." Louise took the card carefully, her eyes widening at the fancy lettering. "You're really the owner of all the diners?" she asked in awe. Antoine winked conspiratorially. "That'll be our little secret, okay? Now, shall we get you home?" Minutes later, the Bentley was gliding smoothly through the city streets. Antoine watched the twins in the rearview mirror, noticing how they marveled at the luxurious interior. Turn left here, please, Sophie instructed shyly. Finally, they arrived at a modest apartment building. Antoine felt a lump in his throat at the rundown state of the place. This is it, Louise announced. Before they stepped out, Antoine turned to face them. Remember, tomorrow, at the diner. I promise it'll be different. The girls nodded, a small smile tugging at their lips. As he watched them enter the building, Antoine felt a growing determination. He would help these children, no matter the cost. Back to the hotel, sir? Jacques asked. No, Antoine replied, his eyes still on the building. To the office. We have work to do. As the car pulled away, Antoine couldn't shake the image of the twins from his mind. There was something about them, a spark, a resilience that reminded him of someone. But who? Shaking his head, he focused on the task ahead. First, he'd make sure these children had food on the table. Then he'd dig deeper into their situation. And maybe, in the process, he'd discover why he felt such a strong connection to two little strangers in a city he had left behind so long ago. Antoine's office was silent, save for the soft hum of his computer and the occasional clink of ice in his whiskey glass. Night had advanced, but sleep eluded him. His eyes, tired yet determined, skimmed through old files and city records. Sophie and Louise Dubois. The twins' names danced in his mind. There was something about them, something that poked at a distant corner of his memory. Antoine leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. Immediately, he was transported to 40 years earlier. Golden Meals was just a small diner, smelling of fresh coffee and freshly baked dreams. A 30-year-old Antoine wiped down the counter, his apron still immaculately white. The doorbell chimed. "Welcome to Golden Meals," he said automatically, looking up. His heart stopped for a moment. There, lit by the morning sun, stood the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Brown hair falling in soft waves, deep eyes that seemed to hold entire universes. "Hello," she smiled shyly. "I saw the sign in the window. Are you hiring?" Antoine stammered for a moment. Yes. I'm Antoine, the owner." "Jeanne," she replied, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you, Antoine." The sound of a notification on his computer brought Antoine back to the present. Blinking, he refocused on the screen. An email from his assistant. "Mr. Laurent, I found information on Amélie Dubois. She's a teacher at St. Michael Elementary School. Address and contact attached." Antoine felt a wave of anticipation. Amélie, the girl's aunt. Perhaps she could shed light on the answers he sought. Without a second thought, he picked up the phone. The following morning, Antoine found himself in a small cafe near Amélie's school. His heart pounded, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. The door opened, and a woman of about 40 walked in. Antoine felt the air leave his lungs. It was like seeing a ghost. Amélie could have been Jeanne's twin, just a few decades younger. The same deep eyes, the same gentle smile. "Mr. Laurent," she asked, approaching his table. Antoine stood, extending his hand. "Yes, thank you for coming. Ms. Dubois." They sat, an uncomfortable silence hovering between them. "So," Amélie began, "you wanted to talk about Sophie and Louise?" Antoine nodded, trying to gather his thoughts. "Yes, I met them yesterday, at my diner." Amélie frowned. "They mentioned something about a diner and a kind woman, but I didn't understand exactly what happened." Antoine briefly recounted the incident, watching as worry creased Amélie's face. "Are they all right?" she asked, her voice shaking. Yes, Antoine assured her. "I'm more concerned about their general situation. They mentioned their father being unemployed." Amélie exhaled deeply. "Thomas has been struggling ever since Christine, since my sister passed away. He tries, but it's not easy." Antoine felt a pang in his chest. "I'm sorry for your loss." Amélie smiled sadly. "Thank you. Christine was special, just like our mother." Something in that sentence made Antoine freeze. "Your mother?" "Yes," Amélie answered, a nostalgic glow in her eyes. "Jeanne. She raised us on her own. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. Antoine's world seemed to stop. Jeanne. The name echoed in his mind, bringing with it a flood of memories. With trembling hands, he reached for his wallet. From a hidden compartment, he drew out an old, yellowed photograph. In it, a young Antoine stood smiling beside a beautiful brown-haired woman. "Is this—" He hesitated, showing the photo to Amélie. "Is this your mother?" Amélie's eyes widened. She took the photo reverently, her fingers tracing the outlines of Jeanne's face. "Yes," she whispered, "but how? Why do you have a photo of her?" Antoine felt decades of secrets and regrets bearing down on him. "Jeanne, she worked for me, at the very start of Golden Meals. She was everything." Amélie looked at Antoine, a slow realization dawning in her eyes. You're him, the man my mother spoke of." Antoine swallowed hard. What did she say? That there was a man once, someone she loved deeply, but circumstances drove them apart. Amélie paused, her eyes narrowing. She left town pregnant, with Christine. The world around Antoine seemed to blur. Christine, the twins' mother. My God, he murmured, the realization hitting him like a train. "The girls, they're your granddaughters," Amélie completed, her voice a mix of shock and wonder. Antoine sank back in his chair, feeling the weight of this revelation. Memories long buried rushed to the surface. Jean's smile, her future plans, the terrible argument that drove them apart. And now, decades later, fate had brought him back, connecting him to a family he never knew he had. "Amélie," he said, his voice thick with emotion, I need to make this right. For Jeanne, for Christine, for the girls." Amélie studied him for a long moment, as though gauging his sincerity. Finally, she nodded. "We have a lot to discuss, Mr. Laurent," she said gently, "and many decisions to make." Antoine agreed, feeling a mix of fear and hope. The past he thought he had left behind had resurfaced, offering him a chance at redemption. While he and Amélie began to untangle decades of secrets and misunderstandings, Antoine knew one thing for certain: his life, and Sophie and Louise's, would never be the same. The coffee grew cold, forgotten on the table between Antoine and Amélie. The cafe's background buzz seemed distant, as if the two were enclosed in a bubble of frozen time. "Tell me about her," Antoine asked, his voice almost a whisper. "About Jeanne, after she left." Amélie took a deep breath, her eyes still fixed on the old photograph. "Mom was strong, incredibly strong. She arrived in our small town, pregnant and alone, but with fierce determination in her eyes." Antoine felt a stab of guilt. "She never mentioned the father." "Not directly," Amélie replied, meeting Antoine's gaze. "But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her looking into an old box of keepsakes. There was sadness in her eyes, but also love." Antoine shut his eyes, memories rushing back. Golden Meals was expanding. Antoine, excited by its success, spoke animatedly about growth. "Think about it, Jeanne. A chain of diners all over the country." Jeanne smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. "Antoine, what about our community here? The people who depend on us?" "They'll understand," Antoine argued. "We're creating opportunities." "At what cost?" Jeanne asked softly. "We're losing our essence, Antoine, the very thing that made us special." The discussion escalated, harsh words were exchanged, and the next morning, Jeanne was gone. "Mr. Laurent?" Amélie's voice pulled him back to the present. "Are you all right?" Antoine blinked, realizing tears had formed in his eyes. "Forgive me," he murmured, wiping them discreetly. "Please, go on." "Christine, she was the light of Mom's life," Amélie finished, a sad smile on her lips. "Christine grew up hearing stories of a magical place called Golden Meals, where everyone was welcome and no one left hungry." Antoine felt his heart clench. So Jeanne remembered him as a lost dream. Christine was curious, Amélie continued, always asking about her father, about Mom's past. But Jeanne, she kept those secrets close to her heart. And then Christine met Thomas? Antoine asked gently. Amélie nodded. Yes, it was a whirlwind romance. They married young, and soon the twins came along, Sophie and Louise. She paused, her voice trembling. Mom was so happy, but also worried, as if she knew she wouldn't be around to see the girls grow up. Antoine frowned. What happened to Jean? Cancer, Amélie whispered. It was quick. Christine was 6 months pregnant with the twins when Mom got the diagnosis. She passed before the girls turned one. The silence that followed was heavy with grief and missed opportunities. And Christine? Antoine finally asked, dreading the answer. Amélie's eyes filled with tears. A car accident. 2 years ago. Thomas was driving. He survived, but the guilt eats him up. Antoine felt the world spinning. So much loss. So many lives affected by a chain of events that, in some way, led back to that fateful argument 35 years ago. The twins, he said, his voice raw with emotion. They're your great-granddaughters, Amélie confirmed, watching Antoine closely. The weight of that revelation hit Antoine like a ton of bricks. Great-granddaughters. He had always assumed his bloodline ended with him. But suddenly, he was connected to 2 little girls who carried not only his blood, but Jeanne's. My God, he muttered, running a hand through his silver hair. All these years, all this lost time. Amélie placed a gentle hand on Antoine's arm. Mr. Laurent, no one could have predicted this. Fate works in strange ways. Antoine nodded slowly, trying to process everything. Then, a new resolve lit his eyes. Amélie, he said, straightening up in his chair, I've made many mistakes in the past, mistakes that cost Jean, Christine, and now Sophie and Louise. I can't change the past, but... He paused, searching for the right words. I need to do something. I need to help. Amélie studied him for a long moment. What exactly do you have in mind, Mr. Laurent? First, he began, already forming plans in his mind. We need to ensure Thomas and the girls have stability. A job for him, support for the children. And then, he hesitated, unsure how his next words would be received. I'd like to get to know them, really know them, be part of their lives, if they'll let me. Amélie took a deep breath, considering. Mr. Laurent, I appreciate your offer and intentions, but understand this family has been through a lot. The girls barely remember their mother, and Thomas, he's struggling. We need to go slow. Antoine nodded, recognizing her caution. Of course, we'll do it at your pace. But please, let me help. It's the least I can do for Jeanne, for her memory. A small smile formed on Amélie's lips. You know, Mom always said that the true heart of Golden Meals wasn't the food, but the love and compassion behind it. Maybe that's the legacy we can honor together. Antoine felt a surge of emotion. Thank you, Amélie, for giving me this chance. As they began discussing the next steps, Antoine couldn't help thinking about Jeanne. Somewhere, he hoped, she was smiling, knowing her family was finally coming together. And though the road ahead was uncertain and bound to be filled with challenges, Antoine was determined to make things right this time, for Jeanne, for Christine, and above all, for Sophie and Louise. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cemetery as Antoine walked slowly among the headstones. His heart grew heavier with each step, burdened by decades of regrets and unfulfilled memories. At last, he stopped in front of a simple granite marker. Jeanne Dubois, 1955-2019, beloved mother and grandmother. Love is the true measure of a life. Antoine felt his legs weaken. Slowly, he knelt on the soft grass, his fingers tracing the letters etched into the cold stone. Oh, Jeanne, he whispered, his voice breaking. How did we end up like this? Closing his eyes, Antoine allowed the memories to flood his mind. Golden Meals was just a dream scribbled on napkins and discussed on sleepless nights. Antoine, brimming with ambition and ideals, could barely contain his excitement. "Think of it, Jeanne," he'd exclaim, arms waving in their tiny apartment. "A place where everyone is welcome, where a meal isn't just food, but an act of communion." Jeanne smiled, her eyes shining with the same passion. "It's beautiful, Antoine. But how are we going to make it happen?" Antoine took her hands in his. "Together, you and me, we can change the world, one plate at a time." Opening day. The small diner sparkled, every surface polished to mirror the hopes and dreams of its founders. Jeanne, wearing a brand new apron, placed a freshly baked apple pie on the counter. "For good luck," she said with a grin. Antoine pulled her into a tight embrace. "We don't need luck. We have each other." The bell above the door chimed, announcing their first customer. "Welcome to Golden Meals," they said in unison, faces radiant with pride and expectation. Success came quickly. Golden Meals became the heartbeat of the community. Antoine and Jeanne worked side by side, turning customers into family. One night after closing, Antoine found Jeanne sitting at a table, going over the books. "What's wrong?" he asked, noticing her worried expression. Jeanne sighed. "Antoine, we're growing so fast. I'm worried we'll lose what makes this place special." He sat beside her, taking her hand. "Never. What we have here is magic, Jeanne. Imagine if we could share this with more people." Jeanne smiled to Mo, but there was a hint of doubt in her eyes. "Maybe. But promise me, we'll never forget why we started." "I promise," Antoine said, sealing the vow with a kiss. The fateful argument Antoine, intoxicated by success and possibilities, spoke of franchises and nationwide expansion. "We could have a Golden Meals in every city," he exclaimed, his eyes shining with ambition. Jeanne, however, was hesitant. "Antoine, what about the people here, our community?" "They'll understand," he argued. "We're creating opportunities." "But at what cost?" Jeanne retorted, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're losing our soul, Antoine, the very thing that makes us unique." The words turned heated. Accusations were hurled. "You've changed," Jeanne said, tears in her eyes. "You're not the man I fell in love with." "And you're holding me back," Antoine shouted, words he would regret for the rest of his life. The next morning, Jeanne was gone. No note, no explanation, just gone. Antoine opened his eyes, returning to the present. Silent tears rolled down his wrinkled cheeks. "I was a fool, Jeanne," he murmured to the headstone. "You were right. I lost my way. I forgot what really mattered." He took out the old photograph, the same one he had shown Amélie. In it, a young Antoine and Jeanne beamed with hope and love in front of the newly opened Golden Meals. "I searched for you, you know," he continued, his voice trembling. "But you vanished without a trace, and I buried myself in work, trying to fill the void you left." Antoine traced Jeanne's face in the photo. If I'd known you were pregnant, oh, Jeanne, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you." A gentle breeze ruffled the leaves of the nearby trees, and for a moment, Antoine could almost hear Jeanne's laughter in the air. "I built an empire," he reflected bitterly, "but I lost what truly mattered. Family, love, the real essence of what we dreamed together." Slowly, Antoine stood, his knees protesting. He took one last look at the headstone, a new determination growing in his chest. "I can't change the past, my love," he said softly, "but I promise you, here and now, that I will do everything in my power to take care of our family. Sophie, Louise, Thomas, they'll have all the support and love I can offer." He inhaled deeply, feeling as though a weight was lifting from his shoulders. "And Golden Meals, I'll bring it back to its roots, to our original values. It'll be a place of community, compassion and love once more. Your legacy will live on, Jeanne. I promise." Carefully, Antoine placed a small bouquet of daisies, Jeanne's favorite, at the base of the headstone. Beside them, he left the old photograph. "Until we meet again, my love," he whispered, touching the stone one last time. As he walked away, Antoine felt a mix of sadness and resolve. The past could not be undone, but the future was still unwritten. And he would do everything possible to honor Jean's memory and mend past mistakes. With firm steps, he left the cemetery, his mind already forming plans. There was so much to do. Help Thomas find a job, secure a bright future for the twins, revitalize Golden Meals. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Antoine couldn't help the small, gentle smile on his lips. It was as if Jeanne was sending a sign, approving his plans and offering her silent forgiveness. "Thank you, Jeanne," he murmured to the twilight sky, "for everything." And with that, Antoine Laurent embarked on the most important journey of his life, to redeem the past and build a future worthy of the love he and Jeanne once shared. The elevator groaned in protest as it climbed slowly to the 5th floor. Antoine adjusted his shirt collar, feeling out of place in his expensive suit in such a rundown building. The smell of mold and reheated food lingered in the air. Stepping into the dimly lit hallway, Antoine hesitated. The number 507 was visible on the door ahead, its peeling paint revealing earlier layers. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. Shuffling footsteps echoed on the other side, followed by excited, childish whispers. The door opened, revealing Thomas Dubois. The man looked like he had aged a decade since the last photo Antoine had seen. Deep shadows under his eyes, shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. "Mr. Dubois," Antoine asked softly. "I'm Antoine Laurent. May I come in?" Thomas frowned, confusion evident on his tired face. "Laurent? The guy who owns that diner?" Before Antoine could respond, two little heads peeked out from behind Thomas's legs. "It's the man with the nice car," Sophie exclaimed, her eyes lighting up in recognition. Louise Shire just gave a small wave. Thomas glanced at his daughters, then back at Antoine, suspicion growing in his gaze. "What do they mean? What do you want?" Antoine felt the weight of decades of secrets and misunderstandings between them. "Mr. Dubois, I know this visit is unexpected, but I have important information. About your mother-in-law, Jeanne." The name seemed to echo in the narrow hallway. For a moment, Thomas stood frozen, then reluctantly opened the door wider. "Come in," he mumbled. The inside of the apartment was even more revealing than the outside. A single room served as living room, kitchen, and dining area. A worn-out couch occupied one wall, clearly doubling as a bed. Toys were neatly stacked in a corner, most looking well used. The twins dashed to the couch, watching the adults with curious eyes. Thomas gestured to a battered kitchen chair. "Please, sit." Antoine complied, noticing how Thomas remained standing, as if needing the advantage of height. "So," Thomas began, arms crossed, "why does a millionaire like you care about Jeanne?" Antoine took a steadying breath. "Mr. Dubois." "Thomas, what I'm about to tell you may be hard to believe, but I ask you to hear me out." Over the next few minutes, Antoine recounted his history with Jeanne, Golden Meals' beginnings, their relationship, the argument that tore them apart. Thomas listened in silence, his expression shifting between shock, anger, and disbelief. "You're telling me," Thomas finally said, voice trembling, "that you're Christine's father, my daughter's grandfather?" Antoine nodded solemnly. "I didn't know, not until a few days ago. If I had known..." "If you had known what?" Thomas cut him off, voice rising. "You would have shown up, helped when Christine was dying, when I lost my job, when your granddaughters were starving." The twins shrank back on the couch, frightened by their father's tone. Antoine rose slowly, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Thomas, you have every right to be angry with me. I made terrible mistakes, mistakes that cost you and your family dearly. I can't change the past, but I'm here now. I want to help." Thomas let out a bitter laugh. "Help? And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "For starters," Antoine said calmly, "I can offer you a job at Golden Meals, a management position, with a salary and benefits that will allow you and the girls a comfortable life. For a moment, Thomas looked tempted, the promise of financial security clear in his eyes, but then his face hardened again. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity," Antoine insisted. "It's an opportunity, a chance for a fresh start, to give your girls the future they deserve." At that, Sophie jumped off the couch. "Dad, please. Could we have our own room? With real beds?" Louise joined her sister, eyes pleading. "And you wouldn't have to work so many hours. We could have dinner together every night." Thomas looked at his daughters, torn. Antoine saw his chance. "Thomas," he said gently, "I know I don't deserve your trust, but think of the girls. They deserve a chance, and so do you." For a long moment, silence reigned in the small apartment. Then, slowly, Thomas's shoulders sagged. I need time to think," he mumbled. Antoine nodded in understanding. "Of course, take all the time you need." He placed a business card on the table. "My personal number is there. When you're ready, call me, day or night." As he prepared to leave, Antoine felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Louise. "Sir," she said timidly, "did you really know our grandma?" Antoine knelt, meeting the girl's gaze. "Yes, sweetheart. Your grandma was the most amazing person I've ever known." Sophie joined her sister. "Will you tell us about her? Daddy doesn't say much." Antoine glanced at Thomas, who, after a moment's hesitation, gave a slight nod. "How about this?" Antoine proposed, a kind smile on his face. "Next time we meet, I'll bring some old photos, and I'll tell you all about your grandma. Deal?" The twins nodded eagerly, their faces lighting up at the idea. Standing up, Antoine noticed a subtle shift in Thomas's posture. The younger man was still wary, but there was a flicker of hope. "Mr. Laurent," Thomas said, walking him to the door. "I can't promise anything, but thanks for coming." Antoine smiled gently. "Thank you for hearing me out, Thomas, and please remember, you're not alone anymore. Not now." As the elevator descended, Antoine felt a whirlwind of emotions. Sadness for the lost time, guilt for past mistakes, but also a glimmer of hope. It was a beginning, however small. Stepping out of the building, he glanced up at the fifth-floor window. For a brief moment, he saw two little faces pressed against the glass, waving shyly. Antoine waved back, a genuine smile spreading across his face. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time in decades, he felt he was heading in the right direction. With determined steps, he walked to his car, his mind already mapping out the next moves. There was so much to be done, so many wrongs to right. But with Jean as his guiding star and Sophie and Louise's future as his motivation, Antoine knew he would do whatever it took to set things right. The journey toward redemption had only just begun. The conference room on the 30th floor of Golden Meal's corporate building was tense. Seated at the head of a long mahogany table, Antoine Laurent studied the faces of the executives around him. Some looked curious, others anxious, and a few, like Robert, unmistakably skeptical. "Ladies and gentlemen," Antoine began, his voice steady despite his 70 years, "I've called this meeting to discuss a significant change in our company's direction." He paused, letting his words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "In the past few days, I've had the opportunity to revisit our roots, the first Golden Meals diner, the heart of everything we've built, and what I saw, well, it wasn't the legacy I intended to leave behind." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Laurent, if this is about the incident with that employee," Antoine raised a hand to silence him. "It's about much more than one incident, Robert. It's about who we are as a company and as a community." He pressed a button, and a presentation began on the screen behind him. Images of the original Golden Meals, pictures of smiling customers and happy employees across the decades. "When I started this business," Antoine continued, emotion coloring his voice, "it wasn't just about selling burgers and milkshakes. It was about creating a home away from home for our community. A place where everyone was welcome, where no one went hungry. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each executive. Somewhere along the way, we lost that vision. We became just another big corporation, prioritizing profit over people. Robert cleared his throat. With all due respect, Mr. Laurent, those profits built an empire. We have shareholders to satisfy, targets to meet. Antoine nodded. I understand your concern, Robert. But what if I told you we can do both? Be financially successful and socially responsible. He pressed another button, revealing new images, graphs, financial projections, detailed plans. I propose a new program, Golden Opportunities. We'll hire local unemployed folks, provide training and career development. We'll turn our diners into community centers, offering after-school programs for kids, literacy classes for adults, and more. The room erupted in murmurs. Some executives looked intrigued, others clearly unconvinced. Mr. Laurent, a marketing executive, spoke up. This sounds inspiring, but how can we ensure it won't hurt our bottom line? Antoine smiled. Excellent question, Ms. Chen. Actually, studies show companies with strong social responsibility have better employee retention, greater customer loyalty, and, in the long run, stronger financial performance. For the next 20 minutes, he laid out the plan in detail, answering questions and addressing concerns. Gradually, he saw the resistance in many faces begin to soften, all except for Robert. This is crazy, he finally burst out. We're throwing away decades of proven strategies because of, what? A sudden crisis of conscience? The room fell silent. Antoine regarded Robert calmly. No, Robert, we're returning to our roots. And as for you, perhaps it's time to reconsider whether your values align with the company's. Robert paled, grasping the implication. Antoine turned back to the group. I don't expect everyone to agree right away, but I ask that you give this vision a chance. Let's start with a pilot program at the original diner. If it succeeds, Winton, we'll expand gradually. After more discussion and a narrow vote, the plan was approved. Antoine felt a surge of relief and determination. The following week, Antoine was back at the original diner. The place buzzed with activity. Painters refreshed the walls, electricians installed new lighting, and a design team rearranged the layout to include a community space. In the middle of it all was Sarah, directing operations with efficiency and enthusiasm. Sarah, Antoine called, making her turn with a bright smile. Mr. Laurent, good to see you. We're making great progress here. Antoine looked around, clearly impressed. I can see that. How's the community reacting? Sarah led him to a newly installed bulletin board. It was covered in colorful notes and drawings. See for yourself, she said, pointing to the messages. Can't wait for cooking classes. Finally a safe place for my kids after school. Thank you for bringing hope back to our neighborhood. Antoine felt a lump in his throat. This is incredible, Sarah. You did all this in a week? Sarah blushed slightly. Well, I had a lot of help. The community really rallied when they heard about the plans. Oh, and there's something else I think you'll want to see. She led him to the back of the diner, where a small crowd had gathered. In the center, to Antoine's surprise, were Thomas and the twins. Thomas, wearing a Golden Meals uniform, was demonstrating how to use new kitchen equipment. Sophie and Louise, in small aprons, watched him with wide-eyed admiration. Thomas accepted the job, Sarah explained softly. He's heading our new training program for young people and the unemployed. Antoine took in the scene, feeling a swell of pride and emotion. Thomas glanced up, noticing his presence, and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. The twins, upon seeing Antoine, ran toward him. Grandpa, they cried in unison, wrapping their arms around his legs. Antoine froze for a moment, surprised by the show of affection. Then, slowly, he knelt to embrace them properly. Hello, my dears, he said softly. Are you enjoying the new diner? Sophie nodded enthusiastically. It's awesome. Dad says we can come here after school to do homework and play, Louise added. And he smiles a lot more now. He's not always sad anymore. Antoine felt his heart fill. Glancing over the girls' heads, he saw Thomas watching. The younger man offered a slight smile and nod, as if to say thank you. Sarah, who had been observing quietly, touched Antoine's shoulder. "Mr. Laurent, I think we have something special happening here." Antoine stood, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, Sarah, I believe we do." As they walked back toward the front, Antoine noticed people gathered outside the window, pointing, smiling, chatting excitedly. "Looks like word got out fast," Sarah commented. Antoine nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "You know, Sarah, when I started this business so many years ago, I dreamed of creating more than just a diner, a place that was the heart of the community." He paused, taking in the freshly painted walls, the bustle of activity, the smiling faces. "I think we're finally on the right track." Sarah smiled, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Better late than never, Mr. Laurent." Antoine chuckled softly. "Yes, my dear, better late than never." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the diner's windows, Antoine felt a peace he hadn't experienced in decades. Golden Meals was returning to its roots, and in so doing he was rediscovering the purpose and joy that had driven him so long ago. The road ahead would still be challenging, but with Sarah, Thomas, the twins, and the entire community by his side, Antoine knew they were on the right path. The true Golden Meals, a beacon of hope, community, and compassion, was being reborn, and this time he would get it right. The sun had barely touched the horizon when Thomas arrived at Golden Meals. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the collar of his new uniform. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the diner's door. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread greeted him, along with Sarah's welcoming smile. "Good morning, Thomas. Ready for your first day?" He nodded, trying to mask his nerves. "I think so." The girls could hardly sleep, they were so excited. Sarah laughed, leading him into the kitchen. "They're not the only ones excited. Come on, let me introduce you to the team." As Sarah made the rounds of introductions, Thomas noticed curious glances and whispers. Clearly, his story, or part of it, had already spread. Carlos, the head cook, offered a warm handshake. "Welcome aboard, Thomas. I hear you've got some kitchen experience." "A bit," Thomas admitted. "I worked in a few restaurants before everything happened." Carlos nodded sympathetically. "Well, we're happy to have you. Let's start with the basics and build up, okay?" Throughout the morning, Thomas worked hard to learn the routines and procedures. His hands, once skilled at flipping pans and chopping ingredients, felt clumsy after years away from the stove. More than once, he found himself blushing at simple mistakes. During the lunch rush, Thomas overheard two younger employees whispering by the sink. "That's him, right? The guy Mr. Laurent hired out of pity. I heard he was practically homeless. Can you imagine what customers will think?" Thomas felt his stomach drop. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he didn't belong here. But then, as if sensing his discomfort, Sarah appeared at his side. "Hey, how's it going?" she asked quietly. Thomas shrugged. "I think I'm slowing everyone down." Sarah offered an encouraging smile. "It's your first day, Thomas. No one expects perfection. The important thing is you're here trying. That's more than most would do in your situation." Her words seemed to lift some of the weight off his shoulders. With a grateful nod, Thomas got back to work, determined to prove himself. Meanwhile, at the corporate office, Antoine faced his own challenges. A stack of reports and alarmed emails piled up on his desk. "Mr. Laurent," his assistant said, entering with yet another folder. "The finance department is requesting an urgent meeting. They're worried about the costs of the Golden Opportunities program." Antoine sighed, massaging his temples. "Schedule it for tomorrow, please. And could you call Robert in? We need to have a talk." Moments later, Robert entered, posture tense. "Sir, you wanted to see me." Antoine motioned for him to sit. "Robert, I've received reports that you've been less than cooperative with our new initiatives." Robert shifted uneasily. "Mr. Laurent, with all respect, these changes are risky. We're throwing away years of proven strategies for what amounts to a charity project. Antoine studied him for a moment. Robert, do you remember why you got into this business? The question seemed to catch Robert off guard. Well, for success, of course. To build something meaningful. And what's more meaningful than changing lives? Antoine asked softly, than giving hope to a community. Robert fell silent, clearly waging an internal battle. Antoine continued, I'm not asking you to agree with everything overnight, but I'm asking you to give it a chance. Go to the diner. See for yourself what we're building. After a long pause, Robert nodded slowly. I shall try, sir. Back at the diner, the day was drawing to a close. Thomas, exhausted but satisfied, wiped down the counter when familiar voices reached his ears. Daddy! Sophie and Louise bounded in, faces glowing with excitement. Behind them, Amélie entered with a tired smile. Hey, princesses, Thomas said, crouching to hug them. How was school? Great, Sophie replied. My teacher said my reading has gotten a lot better, Louise added. And I made a new friend today. He's going to come here tomorrow for the after-school program. Thomas felt his heart swell with pride and gratitude. In just a few weeks, the change in his daughters was palpable. They were happier, more confident. Sarah joined them, smiling at the scene. Hey, girls! How about a special milkshake to celebrate your dad's first official day? While the twins cheered, Amélie pulled Thomas aside. How was it? She asked gently. Thomas hesitated. Hard, he admitted. But good. Better than I expected. Amélie smiled, squeezing his arm reassuringly. I'm proud of you, Thomas. I know it wasn't easy accepting help, but look how much has changed already. He nodded, watching his daughters giggle with Sarah. Yeah, I think we made the right choice. As the weeks passed, small victories began piling up. Golden Meals after-school program quickly gained popularity, with dozens of kids coming every day for homework help and activities. Overcoming his initial nervousness, Thomas became a mentor to other trainees. His story of personal struggle inspired many who, like him, were seeking a second chance. Sarah, for her part, flourished in her leadership role. Her compassion and dedication were infectious, inspiring the entire team to embrace Golden Meal's new vision. One day, during Antoine's weekly visit, he noticed a new addition on the diner's wall, a photo display. What's this? He asked Sarah. She smiled, guiding him closer. It's our wall of transformations. Each photo tells the story of someone whose life was touched by golden opportunities. Antoine examined the pictures, recognizing faces he'd once seen on the streets, now smiling in Golden Meals uniforms. Families reunited over meals, children proudly holding up report cards. At the center of the display, one photo in particular caught his eye. Thomas, Sophie, and Louise, all beaming, with the diner in the background. Incredible, Antoine murmured, feeling overwhelmed. At that moment, the front door opened, and to everyone's surprise, Robert walked in. The regional manager looked around, clearly impressed by the changes. His gaze landed on the photo wall, and for an instant, Antoine saw something shift in his expression. Mr. Laurent, Robert said, approaching. I think I understand now. Antoine smiled, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder. Welcome back to the true spirit of Golden Meals, Robert. As the sun set, casting a golden glow through the diner's windows, Antoine felt a surge of pride and gratitude. The challenges were still many, and the road ahead remained rough. But looking around at Sarah leading with grace, Thomas finding his place, the twins flourishing, and even Robert beginning to come around, he knew they were on the right path. Golden Meals wasn't just a diner. It was a beacon of hope, a catalyst for change, a home for anyone who walked through its doors, and with each small victory, with each life touched, they were rewriting not just the company's story, but an entire community's. Antoine smiled to himself. Jeanne would be proud. The morning sun bathed the newly refurbished Golden Meals in a golden glow, as though blessing the changes made in recent months. Antoine Laurent, now 71, paused outside to take in the sight. 6 months had passed since the scandal that nearly destroyed everything, and at last a new day had dawned. Stepping inside, he was greeted by the lively buzz of conversation and laughter. In one corner, a group of seniors played chess. In another, students pored over books in the after-school tutoring program. The scent of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air, mingling with the unmistakable aroma of hope and renewal. Sarah spotted him and walked over with a radiant smile. "Good morning, Mr. Laurent. Ready for the big announcement?" Antoine nodded, his eyes filled with pride and nostalgia. As he made his way through the diner, he couldn't help reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The decision to be utterly transparent during the crisis, though risky, had proven to be Golden Meal's salvation. The community, touched by their honesty and resolve, had come together in unexpected ways. Near the community wall, now expanded to cover an entire side, Antoine stopped to read a recent newspaper clipping. Ex-Golden Meal's executive convicted of fraud. The accompanying photo showed Robert being escorted out of the courthouse. Antoine felt a pang of sadness, but also the satisfaction that justice had been served. Thomas, now general manager, approached with a smile. "They're all set in the conference room, Mr. Laurent." Moments later, Antoine found himself in front of a small crowd, employees, board members, and community representatives. Taking a deep breath, he began, "Good morning, everyone. Today marks not just a new chapter for Golden Meals, but the close of an era. After much thought, I've decided it's time for me to retire." A ripple of surprise passed through the room, but Antoine raised his hand for silence. "Don't worry, Golden Meals is in excellent hands. It's with great pride that I announce our new leadership structure, Sarah Peterson as CEO and Thomas Dubois as COO. The room erupted in enthusiastic applause as Sarah and Thomas stepped up, looking equally stunned and grateful. "These two," Antoine continued, "embody everything Golden Meals stands for: compassion, integrity, resilience. Under their leadership, I know our mission to feed not just bodies but souls will continue to flourish." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "These past months have tested us in unimaginable ways. We faced our greatest crisis and emerged not just survivors, but transformed. And that, my friends, is thanks to each and every one of you." From his pocket, he took out an old photograph, the same one showing a young Jeanne and a dark-haired Antoine in front of the original Golden Meals. "This is Jeanne, the true founder of Golden Meals in spirit. She taught me that the real measure of success isn't profit, but the lives we touch." The room fell into a respectful hush, many eyes glistening. Just then, the doors opened and Sophie and Louise walked in, carrying a large cake decorated with the new Golden Meals logo. "Surprise, Grandpa!" they cheered in unison. Antoine laughed, his heart overflowing with love. The twins, now healthy and radiant, were living proof of the transformation they'd all undergone. The celebration that followed was filled with laughter, shared stories, and promises for the future. Antoine circulated among the guests, savoring every moment, every face, every hug. By late afternoon, he found himself outside, watching the sun set in a wash of gold. Sarah joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "A penny for your thoughts," she said softly. Antoine smiled. "Just thinking about the power of small acts of kindness. You know, all this began with one compassionate waitress feeding 2 hungry girls." Sarah blushed slightly. "Who would have thought that moment would change so many lives?" "That's how real change happens," Antoine reflected. "Not through grand gestures, but through small acts of love and compassion, one at a time." They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching people come in and out of the diner, families gathering for dinner, volunteers arriving for the evening shift, students settling down for study sessions. "You've built something amazing here, Mr. Laurent," Sarah finally said, "something that will outlive all of us." Antoine shook his head. "We built it, Sarah. All of us. and that's why I know it's in good hands." As the sky turned pink and gold, Antoine felt a profound sense of peace. Golden Meals wasn't just a diner or even a company, it was a testament to the power of love, compassion, and community. He thought of Jean, of Christine, of everyone who had been part of this journey, and he knew deep in his heart that they would be proud. As the diner lights flicked on, casting a welcoming glow onto the street, Antoine smiled. A new chapter was beginning, not just for Golden Meals, but for the entire community. And while his active role was coming to an end, Antoine knew the real work, the work of nurturing souls, spreading kindness, building connections, would carry on. One plate at a time, one smile at a time, one act of compassion at a time. Because in the end, that was what truly mattered. Not profits or recognition, but the bonds forged, the lives changed, the souls fed. And as Antoine looked at the vibrant scene before him, the busy diner, the united community, the legacy of love that had grown from a simple dream, he knew he had fulfilled the promise he made to Jean all those years ago. Golden Meals was truly the heart of a community, and its warmth would continue to shine, feeding bodies and nourishing souls for generations to come. That night, back home, Antoine prepared for bed and picked up the old photo of Jeanne from his bedside table. "Oh, Jeanne," he murmured, tracing her face with his finger. "I hope I'm doing the right thing. I hope I'm honoring your legacy." And for a brief instant, perhaps just his imagination, Antoine could have sworn he saw Jeanne smiling back at him, her eyes brimming with pride and love. With that image in mind, he drifted off to sleep, comforted by the knowledge that no matter what the next day brought, he would face it with the strength and integrity Jeanne had always seen in him. Jeanne's legacy would live on, not just within the walls of Golden Meals, but in the hearts and actions of everyone she had touched. And Antoine was determined to ensure that legacy remained intact, no matter the cost. Antoine's office was silent, the tension palpable in the air. Robert sat rigidly in a chair across the desk, his gaze shifting between defiance and anxiety. Antoine, for his part, appeared calm, though his heart raced. "Robert," Antoine began, his voice firm, "we discovered something during our recent audit, something that deeply disturbed me." Robert shifted uneasily. "What are you talking about, Mr. Laurent?" Antoine slid a folder across the desk. "See for yourself." With trembling hands, Robert opened the folder. His eyes went wide as he flipped through pages of charts, figures, and irrefutable evidence of his fraud. I can explain," he stammered. "Please do," Antoine replied, his tone icy. Robert began mumbling excuses, financial pressures, personal problems, anything to justify his actions. But as he spoke, his voice changed. The defensiveness gave way to something more sinister. "You know, Mr. Laurent," Robert said, straightening in his chair, "I'm not the only one with secrets." Antoine frowned. "What do you mean?" Robert offered a malicious smile. "Jeanne Dubois, your secret affair. The daughter you abandoned. I'm sure the shareholders would be fascinated by that story." Antoine's blood ran cold. How did Robert know? Realizing his advantage, Robert continued, "What about a deal? You overlook my discrepancies, and I keep your story under wraps. Everyone wins." For a moment, Antoine was tempted. It was an easy out. He could avoid scandal, protect the company's reputation. But then Jean's voice echoed in his mind. "Our integrity is what makes us special." Antoine rose slowly, his determination renewed. "No, Robert, there will be no deal. What you did was wrong, and there will be consequences." The door flew open and Sarah entered, followed by 2 security guards. "Mr. Laurent, everything okay here?" Antoine nodded. "Yes. Sarah, please escort Mr. Robert out. His services are no longer required at Golden Meals." As Robert was led away, shouting threats, Antoine sank into his chair. The storm was just beginning. In the hours that followed, Antoine's office turned into crisis central. Sarah, Thomas, and other loyal team members gathered, working feverishly to assess the damage and devise a plan. The total diverted funds amount to nearly $2 million over the years, Sarah reported, her voice tense. This could seriously jeopardize our community programs. Thomas, now a key player on the team, added, and employees are starting to ask questions. Rumors are spreading. As if to prove his point, Antoine's phone rang. It was his press officer. Mr. Laurent, we have a problem. The local media got hold of the story. They're asking for a comment on allegations of fraud at Golden Meals. Antoine closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. But when he opened them again, a fierce resolve burned within. Call a press conference, he instructed, and gather all the employees. It's time for complete transparency. Sarah eyed him with concern. Are you sure? We could try to control the narrative, minimize the damage. Antoine shook his head. No, Jean always said the truth, however painful, is the only path. We face this head on. 2 hours later, the main dining area of Golden Meals was packed. Anxious employees, hungry journalists, and worried community members crowded in, awaiting answers. Antoine took a makeshift stage under the glare of camera flashes. He drew a deep breath, finding courage in the memory of Jean and the silent support of Sarah and Thomas at his side. Good afternoon, everyone, he began, voice steady despite his nerves. I'm here today to address allegations of fraud within Golden Meals. It is with deep regret that I confirm these allegations are true. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Antoine raised his hand for silence. A senior executive diverted significant funds over the years. This individual has been terminated, and we're cooperating fully with the authorities. He paused, looking directly at the worried faces of his employees. I know many of you are concerned about your jobs, about Golden Meals' future. Let me assure you, we will do everything in our power to fix this. No one will lose their job because of this wrongdoing. Antoine then turned to address the community members. To our community, which has trusted and supported us, I apologize. We failed in our oversight, but I promise you, we will be better, more transparent, more accountable. The programs we've started will continue. The heart of Golden Meals, the spirit of compassion and community service, remains intact. As Antoine continued, outlining plans for stricter audits, a compensation fund for affected programs, and a renewed commitment to ethical business, something remarkable happened. The room's initial shock and anger began to shift into something else. Hope. Employees exchanged determined glances. Community members nodded in support. Even some reporters seemed impressed by his honesty and plan of action. After the conference, as the team gathered to discuss next steps, Thomas approached Antoine. Mr. Laurent, he said, voice thick with emotion, I want you to know, we're with you, all of us. What you've built, what it means to people like me and my daughters, it's worth fighting for. Antoine felt tears prick his eyes. Thank you, Thomas. That means more than you can imagine. Sarah joined them, eyes shining with resolve. So, what's the plan? In the weeks that followed, Golden Meals faced its toughest challenge. The media was relentless, shareholders furious, and for a while, it seemed everything they'd worked for might collapse. But then something incredible happened. The community rallied. Former beneficiaries of Golden Meals programs came forward to defend the company. Employees worked extra hours without complaint. Even competitors offered support, recognizing the good Golden Meals had done. Antoine led the charge, working tirelessly to recover diverted funds, restructure the company, and rebuild public trust. He sold personal assets, slashed his own salary, and became the face of transparency and accountability. There were moments of doubt, nights when the burden felt overwhelming. But whenever Antoine thought about giving up, he glanced at Jeanne's photo on his desk, or saw Sophie and Louise playing in the diner, or witnessed Sarah and Thomas's unwavering dedication, and he found the strength to go on. Slowly, but surely, things started to improve. The community programs not only survived but expanded, fueled by an outpouring of donations and volunteers inspired by golden meal's resilience. One evening, months after the initial revelation, Antoine stood alone in the diner after closing. Surveying the walls now adorned with supportive messages from the community, he felt a surge of emotion wash over him. "We did it, Jeanne," he whispered to the empty air. "It wasn't easy, but we did it." And though the road ahead remained long, Antoine knew that with the truth as their guide and Jeanne's spirit as their inspiration, Golden Meals would not just survive, it would thrive. The storm had passed, and the dawn of a new day was on the horizon. The rising sun lit up the newly restored facade of Golden Meals, its sign gleaming like a promise fulfilled. Antoine Laurent, at 71, stood for a moment, admiring the view. 6 months had passed since the scandal nearly destroyed everything, but now, at last, a new day had arrived. Stepping inside, Antoine was greeted by a lively hum. People from all walks of life shared tables and smiles. Sarah, now Director of Community Operations, greeted him with a warm hug. "Good morning, Mr. Laurent. Ready for the big announcement?" Antoine nodded, pride and nostalgia shining in his eyes. As he walked through the diner, he couldn't help recalling the journey that had led them here. Their decision to be completely transparent during the crisis, risky though it was, had saved Golden Meals. The community, moved by the honesty and determination to right the wrongs, had come together in ways no one expected. Near the community bulletin board, now expanded to an entire wall, Antoine paused to read a recent headline: "Ex-Golden Meals executive convicted of fraud." The photo showed Robert being escorted out of court. Antoine felt a twinge of sadness, but also the satisfaction of seeing justice served. Thomas, now general manager, walked up with a grin. "Everything's set up in the conference room, Mr. Laurent." Minutes later, Antoine stood before a small crowd of employees, board members, and community leaders. Taking a deep breath, he began his speech. "Good morning, everyone. Today doesn't just mark a new chapter for Golden Meals, it also signifies the end of an era. After much reflection, I've decided it's time for me to retire." A wave of surprise rippled through the attendees, but Antoine raised his hand for calm. "Don't worry. Golden Meals is in very capable hands. It is with immense pride that I announce our new leadership team, Sarah Peterson as CEO and Thomas Dubois as COO. A thunderous round of applause followed as Sarah and Thomas joined Antoine at the front, both looking stunned and deeply moved. "These two," Antoine continued, "exemplify everything Golden Meals stands for: compassion, integrity, and resilience. I know that under their leadership, our mission to feed not just bodies but souls will continue to thrive." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "The last few months have tested us in unimaginable ways. We faced our greatest crisis and emerged stronger, not because of me, but because of all of you." Antoine pulled out an old photo, Jean, young and radiant, standing beside a younger version of himself before the very first Golden Meals. "This is Jeanne, the real founder of Golden Meals in spirit. She taught me that true success isn't in the profits we earn, but in the lives we touch." A respectful hush fell over the room, many eyes brimming with tears. At that moment, the doors swung open and Sophie and Louise entered, carrying a large cake adorned with Golden Meals' updated logo. "Surprise, Grandpa!" they shouted together. Antoine laughed, his heart overflowing. The twins, now beaming with health and happiness, were living proof of how far they'd all come. The celebration that followed was filled with laughter, shared memories, and renewed commitments. Antoine moved among the crowd, cherishing every moment, every face, every embrace. Late in the afternoon, he found himself standing outside, watching the golden sunset. Sarah joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts," she said softly. Antoine smiled, just marveling at how much can change from small acts of kindness. "You know, this all started with one compassionate waitress feeding 2 hungry girls." Sarah blushed a bit. Who would have guessed that single moment would transform so many lives? "That's how real change happens," Antoine reflected. Small acts of love, one by one. They stood quietly, watching people come and go, families sharing dinners, volunteers arriving for evening service, students gathering for study sessions. "You've created something extraordinary here, Mr. Laurent," Sarah said at last. "Something that will endure long after we're gone." Antoine shook his head. "We created it, Sarah, all of us. And that's how I know it's going to be okay." As the sky streaked pink and gold, Antoine felt a profound sense of peace. Golden Meals wasn't just a diner or even a business. It was a testament to the power of compassion, community, and love. He thought of Jean, of Christine, of all those who had been part of this story, and he knew, deep in his soul, that they would be proud. As the diner's lights flicked on, bathing the street in a warm glow, Antoine smiled. A new chapter was beginning, not just for Golden Meals, but for the entire community. And though his active role was ending, Antoine understood that the real work, the work of feeding souls, spreading kindness, building connections, would go on, one plate at a time, one smile at a time, one act of compassion at a time. For in the end, that was what truly mattered, not the profits or accolades, but the bonds forged, the lives touched, the souls nourished. And as Antoine beheld the vibrant scene before him, a bustling diner, a united community, a legacy of love grown from a simple dream, he knew he had fulfilled the promise he once made to Jeanne. Golden Meals truly was the heart of a community, and its warmth would continue to shine, feeding bodies and nurturing souls for generations to come,